Hello and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this section, we'll be going over the different tools in Photoshop, and in this video, we'll be picking up where we left off in the Creation tools. Continuing on in the Tools panel, I'm going to right-click the Brush tool to open the Brush flyout menu. Then, I'm going to select the Color Replacement tool. The Color Replacement tool may not strictly be a Creation tool since it samples from your existing image, but it does cover over things and result in new content entirely. To duplicate my background layer, I'm just going to go over and make sure that I have my background layer selected. Then I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut, Control-J. This will jump or copy my locked background layer onto a new unlocked layer. Then, to hide the background layer, I'll just press the eyeball icon next to it. If you remember how to use the background eraser tool, you'll be happy to know that the color replacement tool works very similarly. The main difference is that instead of erasing a color, it replaces a color with one of your choosing. Here's a photo of a dancer with a colorful outfit. She has a pink beanie, a pink top, and a green leg warmer. Let's try making these go a little better together by painting this leg warmer pink to match the others. I'm going to choose the pink I want by clicking my foreground color swatch in the Tools panel. Then I'll sample some pink in her top and click OK. Now I'll just use the color replacement tool to start painting over the green. I'm getting the pink color that I want, but if I get too close to the edges, it starts painting the outside with pink as well. This is happening because by default, my sampling is set to continuous, which means that my brush will continually replace every color that the crosshair touches. I only want to replace the green here, which is mostly just one color. I'll undo my painting by hitting Ctrl-Z on my keyboard. Then I'll go up in the tool options and set my sampling to once. Now when I paint over the green, it will only paint over the first range of color that the crosshair touches, because the sampling is set to only sample once. This is looking better, but the tool is neglecting some of these darker greens in the creases of the fabric. I'll hit Ctrl-Z again to undo. Then I'm going to go back up to the tool options and increase the tolerance to around 50%. Now as I brush with the tool, it's affecting a wider range of the first color that I click. But with the higher tolerance comes a greater chance for me to accidentally color over some areas outside of the fabric. If that happens, I can just keep using the tool, resampling other areas and brushing to cover over some of the mistakes. Another difference between the color replacement tool and the background eraser is up here in the tool options under Mode. These are different color modes that allow you to affect either the hue, saturation, color, or luminosity. I encourage you to play around with these different modes to see what role they could play in your projects. The next creation tool we have is awesome. It takes brushing to a whole new level. Back in the Tools panel, I'll right-click my Color Replacement tool to get to the Mixer Brush tool. The Mixer Brush tool lets you treat your digital brush more like a real-life brush, allowing you to create incredibly authentic-looking paintings in Photoshop. Let's see what we have here in the tool options. First, we have the Brush Preset Picker. This is pretty standard for Photoshop brushes. You can see that we have all the same presets and brush tips that we can get with the Brush tool. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down in my presets till I get to the bottom, and I'm going to choose the very last brush, called Rough Round Bristle. Further in the tool options, we start getting into some more exclusive options. These are what make the brush function more like a traditional brush. First off, this color box here represents what color you have currently loaded onto the brush. If we want to change this, all we have to do is go down in the Tools panel and change the foreground color to what we want. But one of the interesting things about this brush is that it doesn't necessarily need a color loaded onto it for it to work. Up in the tool options, if I uncheck this option here to load color after each stroke, it's going to clear the loaded color. And now we're basically painting with a brush that just has water on it. All I have to do is click and drag to spread the existing colors around the canvas. This gives us a pretty neat effect, and it's interesting to be able to just smudge the colors around as if they were part of a still wet painting. Now I'll go back in the tool options to give you a basic idea of what these options do. The wet option determines how much the brush will push things around. So if I decrease this to around 7% and try painting again, you can see that it barely does anything at all. So if your brush doesn't have any paint loaded onto it, it absolutely must be somewhat wet to have any effect on your image. Back in the tool options, I'm going to bring that wetness back up to 100%. Then I'll go over to Mix and make sure it's at 0%. I'll explain why in just a minute. Load determines how much paint is loaded onto the brush before you paint with it. If I go back and select the button to load the brush after each stroke, then set the load to around 7%, you can see that the color starts off fine, but eventually it tapers off, and I'm back to using just a plain wet brush. Whereas if the load is set to 100%, the brush can continue to paint with my color indefinitely. Mix basically determines how much of the image will be mixed with the loaded paint. So 0% mix will show only loaded paint, while 100% mix will show very little paint at all, and instead it'll just spread the image around as if it was wet again. This is why when I wanted to paint with only my loaded color, I had to set the mix to 0%. Finally, Flow decides how dense your brush strokes will be. So if I set this to 100% flow, I'll get these very heavy, dense strokes. Whereas if I decrease the flow to around 15%, I'll still be painting, but with a much lighter brush that won't affect the image much at all. Again, I strongly encourage playing with the different presets and options Photoshop has to offer. This is one of the more complex tools in Photoshop, but it's also one of the most extensive tools. Speaking of extensive, that will about do it for this tutorial. We'll go over some more creation tools in the next video.